समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. The Finance Minister has just tabled the Union Budget 2026-27 and you're watching Economics. If I had to describe the Union Budget in one line, it would be this. This is a continuity budget focused on investment, stability and capacity, not dramatic giveaways. That was also the broad expectation I had flagged earlier in the morning, because when an economy is broadly stable, governments don't change course aggressively. And if you look closely at the announcements made today, this is exactly what this budget reflects. Let me walk you through the key takeaways and what they actually mean beneath the headlines. 1. This is a textbook continuity budget. There are no shocks in this budget, and that is deliberate. Budgets usually change sharply when growth is weak, inflation is high, unemployment is rising, or there is visible economic stress. None of those warning lights are flashing right now. So instead of changing the medicine, the government has stayed the course. In a volatile global environment, such as wars, with trade restrictions taking place, sudden capital movements, predictability itself becomes policy. When the world is shaky, looking boring and predictable is often the smartest economic choice. 2. Fiscal discipline has been protected even before elections. The fiscal deficit for the fiscal year 2027 has been pegged at 4.3% of GDP, improving slightly from the last year. That tells us something very important. Fiscal discipline is no longer a political choice. It is a structural constraint. India's bonds are now part of global indices, and foreign investors track India daily. Borrowing costs are being closely watched, and if in this particular situation fiscal discipline slips, three things will happen for sure. Borrowing will rise, interest rates will increase, and costs will increase across the economy. That ends up hurting businesses, home buyers, infrastructure projects, practically everyone. This budget makes it very clear that credibility with lenders is being prioritized over short-term populism. 3. No big tax cuts, and that was always likely. There were no sweeping income tax cuts for the middle class. Instead, what we saw was tax simplification, not tax reduction. Extended timelines for revising returns, lower TCS on travel, education and medical spending, rationalization of TDS rules, relief in specific hardship cases. The logic here is simple. Large tax cuts tend to reduce government income. And if spending doesn't fall, borrowing will increase. And when borrowing increases, interest rates increase. So paradoxically, aggressive tax cuts today can slow growth tomorrow. This budget chooses lower friction over lower revenue. 4. Capital expenditure remains the main growth engine. Public capital expenditure has been increased to 12.2 lakh crore rupees. This confirms that infrastructure-led growth is no longer a temporary strategy. It is now the core economic model. CapEx does three things simultaneously. Number 1, it builds productive assets. Number 2, it lowers costs across the economy. And number 3, it crowds in private investment. This is exactly why the government keeps returning to infrastructure year after year. It is slow, unglamorous, but structurally very powerful. 5. Infrastructure is now about connectivity, not just construction. The announcement of 7 high-speed rail corridors described as growth connectors is very important. This is not just about trains. It's about linking labor markets. It's about reducing travel time between industrial hubs. It's about increasing economic density. Infrastructure policy has clearly shifted from building assets to integrating regions. This is a more mature phase of infrastructure thinking, in my opinion. 6. Manufacturing is being treated as strategic, not cyclical. Across announcements on semiconductors, electronics components, biopharma, textiles, capital goods, the message has been consistent. Manufacturing is no longer seen as just another sector. It is being treated as a strategic capability. Now, you may wonder why. The reason is because manufacturing creates mass employment. It generates exports and it supports currency stability. Services also do stabilize the economy, but manufacturing transforms it. This budget clearly reflects that distinction. 7. Rare earths and critical minerals move on from analysis to policy. One of the most consequential and least flashy announcements is the creation of dedicated rare earth and critical mineral corridors. This matters enormously. The factories of the future do not run on tariffs or slogans. They will run on copper, lithium, nickel, rare earths, and reliable energy. This is something I had written about earlier, that India's manufacturing ambitions were increasingly constrained by a shallow and import-dependent resource base. We were trying to build factories without securing the raw materials and midstream processing those factories depend on. This budget quietly acknowledges that gap. By treating mining, processing, and mineral logistics as national economic infrastructure, the government is signaling a shift from viewing mining as a marginal revenue activity to seeing it as a foundational industrial input. This is not about digging more. It's about owning value chains, especially the midstream where strategic leverage sits. In a world where supply chains are weaponized, mineral security is manufacturing security. 8. MSME policy shifts from survival to scale. The three-pronged MSME approach, namely equity support, liquidity support, and professional support, reflects a change in intent. For years, MSME policy focused on keeping firms alive. Now the focus is on scaling viable firms, improving governance, and integrating MSMEs into larger supply chains. The language of champions is quite telling because this is about productivity and not protection after all. 9. Compliance reform, not headline reform. There were no shock reforms in this budget. Instead, what we see are process reforms. I did talk about this in the live today morning prior to the budget announcement. Simplified tax procedures, clearer compliance rules, reduced ambiguity, these don't really grab headlines, but they matter enormously to businesses. A firm would rather have predictable rules for 10 years than a flashy incentive for 2. This budget clearly prioritizes systems over slogans, and that's a very good step. 10. Services policy is being rebuilt around pipelines. The proposed Education Employment Enterprise Standing Committee reflects a recognition that services growth alone is not enough. What matters is skill alignment, employment pathways, and long-term adaptability. Rather than announcing new schemes, the government is trying to fix transitions from education to work, from work to enterprise. That's a subtle but very important shift. 11. Social spending is targeted, not expansive. Announcements around girls' hostels, women entrepreneurs, health and education capacity are carefully calibrated. They aim to improve access, build human capital, and also avoid fiscal slippage. This is redistribution within limits, very consistent with a stability first framework. And finally, 12. Climate policy is being framed as industrial readiness. The rupees 20,000 crore allocation for carbon capture, utilization and storage is revealing. Climate policy here is not framed as moral signaling. It is rather being framed as technology development, industrial preparedness, and long-term competitiveness. This is a pragmatic approach for a developing economy. Now, if you step back, every major decision in this budget fits into one simple triangle. Stability leads to investment, and investment leads to credibility. I'll explain how. Stability allows investment, investment builds capacity, and capacity reinforces credibility. In a fragmented global economy, credibility is not a soft concept. It directly affects borrowing costs, capital flows, and growth. This budget is not about drama, it's more about discipline. And in uncertain times, continuity is not complacency, it is strategy.